So welcome to our webinar on developing confident speakers. It seems a bit strange that we are developing speaking skills over Zoom this afternoon, and my way of getting you to speak as well is by you using the chat box as much as possible to either feed me some answers or to share ideas. This brings me on to my next slide to tell you what our aims are for this webinar. We're going to identify and discuss what the skill of speaking is, and then think about the sub-skills of speaking. Then we'll explore how to approach those different sub-skills when we are teaching speaking in class. Going to give you some practical classroom activities, and I'm going to allow you, as far as we can, to try them out. And then most importantly is to get you to be excited about the teaching of speaking. And I can see that you're all still logging in here and you're introducing yourselves in the chat box. I'll be monitoring that as we go through. I won't be looking at the Q&A function. We'll leave that until the end. So it's good evening video from KSA, which is the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. Again, I think that was the last country that I went to with HarperCollins just before the pandemic started, or it was as it was starting. It was about mid-February 3 years ago. So I'm going to start with this question. What does being a confident speaker mean to you? And I'd like you to think about that by using the chat box. Okay, so that is the question. I'd like you to try and answer, or to give me your thoughts about it, what you think. And whilst you are typing in your thoughts or your opinions, okay, I am going to just bring up the next slide to tell you about a little quiz that we're going to do throughout this webinar. And that's just to make sure that you're listening, okay? At various points, there will be 5 selected words which are going to be highlighted in the color green. And these words are going to feed into a quiz or an anagram. You're going to take the first letter of each word, and you're going to be spelling a particular word. And that word for me is very pertinent, very valuable for when we're teaching speaking, or when we want to get our students to speak lots in class. There is a slight element that we need to introduce to our lessons for them to really develop that confidence. Okay, so let's go back to that slide. What does being a confident speaker mean to you? Simonette, I think you're from Romania. You said fluency and naturality. Okay, I like that word, naturality. That's an interesting way of putting it. It's like being natural, being at ease. So I agree with you very much there. For me, being a confident speaker is really the ability to take part in a meaningful conversation. It's someone who has got the language at their disposal to do so. And it's the language at their particular level. So they could be a low level, like an A1, A2 level, but they're able to communicate what they want to somebody else. And if they don't have that language, it means then they've got the communication strategies to get around this. And what I mean by communication strategies are like, well, by using hand gestures, for example, or by using what we say, conversation fillers, pauses, when we and the are, and strategies like that to just get around the fact that they don't know the word, or perhaps to be able to express themselves using different language. They need to be able to feel comfortable. And this is what Simonette means, I think, with naturality. So quiz, you know what to do. I think the next slide is going to actually help us with the first word. Okay, it won't be in the order of the word that we're trying to spell, but later on I'll be asking you to type those words into the chat box. So, what is speaking? Note, this is the first word, speaking. Is it just blah, 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 as you can see here? Or is it going to be more entertaining and more meaningful than that? What is speaking in the language classroom? And I'd like you to use the chat box. What does speaking mean to you in the language classroom? It's communication. That's great, Marta. Thank you. It's expressing our thoughts and opinions. Brilliant. It's oral communication. Thank you, Carmen. Speaking is one of the 4 language skills. So it goes with reading, writing, and listening. It's important, or it's as important, to develop speaking as much as it is the other skills. Thank you, Simonette. It is a productive skill. So speaking, along with writing, is our output skill. It's the skill that we're going to get our students to use productively and actively. It's a skill that they will be able to demonstrate their understanding and manipulation of English. Now, listening and speaking go together, but we can also put speaking and writing together so that we can have output or input versus output. Thank you, Edwin. It's to convey information. I'd like to just actually have a step back here, and I don't want to get into too much theory about learning a second language, but I often actually remind my teachers that when I meet them face to face about speaking and listening, and about how we learn our first language. We weren't actually born to speak. We didn't come out into the world and start going blah, 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 blah. Yes, we learned how to cry, or we cried naturally, and then we learned how to form certain sounds by listening to our mother or our carer. And then eventually over time, we had to then, we trained our muscles in our mouths and our tongue got tighter and tighter, and we were able to then fine-tune language to producing sounds, which then became words, and then that became sentences, and then the rest is like history with learning the second language. Now, when we're teaching speaking in the classroom, we don't have the opportunity of those 5 years when we can be silent, or 3 years of when we can be silent. We actually have to teach speaking on fast track. So that is something to bear in mind with our learners when they're silent, quite silent to begin with. but we want to be able to give them the confidence and the communication strategies or scaffolds to be able to produce language. Now, another question for you, okay, is for you to consider, and that is, what are the sub-skills for speaking? Some of you have already said, okay, to convey information, I can see, and communication. What else do you think comes under a sub-skill for speaking that we should try to achieve with our language learners, with our students in class? What else do you think we should try and teach them? Okay, I've got another new message coming up. Let me just bring down my screen. Brilliant, Simonette. Thank you. Okay, pronunciation I would consider to be a sub-skill. And that is something that we should try and teach actively in class. It may be in isolation, or it may be within the actual particular lesson. Intonation as well. Pronunciation and intonation. Okay, and then we're coming in thick and fast here. Skills in the mother tongue with grammar. It helps building a second language. Okay, very good. This is essential. Okay, this is very good if you are with a language system that is similar to English. Thank you very much for actually, Edwin, for saying vocabulary. Yeah, it's to have vocabulary which is a form of communication, okay, at your disposal. You need vocabulary in order to speak, and then an awareness of sentence construction as well. So I'm aiming here at one particular sub-skill: vocabulary and sentence construction. Coherence, great. Coherence and cohesion. Nice. Cohesion is actually about how the language builds together, and discourse as well. This is another sub-skill which perhaps that would fall under the category for me of communication. Pronunciation. Within pronunciation, we've got phonology, about how sounds are made. Okay, we've also got another couple of sub-skills, and I'm going to bring up my word cloud for you, okay, for you to have a look. And you can see this is something that I did earlier when I fed in what I thought the sub-skills were. Usually we think about communication, accuracy, pronunciation, and fluency, and then also phonology. But also we've got the thought processes that go in beforehand. Okay, so that is a bit more of a meta skill. We've also got the non-verbal systems, for example, our facial expressions and our hand gestures. We've also got the art of negotiation, which is really important. I think it's a skill that is a soft skill that is implicitly taught at or in a language classroom. And there's something here that I would like to highlight. Perhaps it should have been made bigger, and that is confidence. Okay, we want to build our learners or our students' confidence. And how can we do that? By getting them, okay, to improve their fluency, to improve their accuracy, to improve their pronunciation, and to get them to be confident communicators. I'm going to focus, first of all, on fluency and how we can achieve that in class. Can you use the chat box, okay, to write down, what does fluency mean to you? We've already spoken about communication. What else does it mean to you? Perhaps it might be expanding a bit more on that word naturality, which I loved. I think it was it Simonette that said earlier, through dialogues. Okay, thank you very much. Lovely, Marta. It's the skill to create speech. And it's interesting because for me, fluency goes hand in hand with creativity. It's not just about reading something off the page and having that fluent pronunciation, okay? But it's about being able to use the language that you know to speak at a natural pace with ease, have little interference from, or minimal interference from another language, and really basically about being understood. Simonette, you have mentioned about debate here, and somebody else has mentioned about dialogues. We will look at that later, okay? And Simonette, you've mentioned here monologue and impromptu speech. Yes, it's being able to just spark off something with your learners. Okay. Does it also mean fluency? Does it also mean reducing pauses in your students' language? So if you could just type in there a yes or a no. Does it mean reducing pauses? Are pauses good in language? A natural flow of communication. Thank you, Carmen. Okay. Does fluency mean reducing pauses? So Simonette has said yes. I'm happy to accept both yes and no here, because I would say that reducing pauses could also be, thank you, Bimol. Yes, it's not necessarily, okay. If you'd like to expand on that, okay. Somebody has just said good evening. I think that might be from Saudi Arabia, I don't know. But welcome anyway. Okay, sometimes pauses are necessary in communication. Great point. Okay, lovely. Students may need time to think. That is so very true. Okay, yes, it's great to emphasize ideas. Okay, I agree with you. And what we want to do as well is to be able to give our learners the language, which I call pause fillers or conversation fillers, so they can have that at their disposal in order for them to be searching for other ideas really quickly inside their heads. And I've got a few ideas later to give you. Jocelyn, you're saying agreed, not necessarily. Pauses reflect the student's ability to take their time to consider and understand the dialogues and sentences being said. So very true. And I know that I'm very guilty as well in the classroom of not giving my students enough time to process the language inside their heads before they actually speak. And lots of research has gone on into this and saying, I think you should give a 10-second pause before you really should expect an answer from your students. Okay, so fluency means really to be able to continue speaking at a natural pace. Now, how does this balance out with accuracy? Okay, what does accuracy here mean to you? Because we're going to have this seesaw of fluency versus accuracy. And I would like us to see if we could get a working definition together here over Zoom in the chat box about accuracy. So if you could type in your answers, what is accuracy? when you're speaking. Correct structures and vocabulary. That's great. Okay. That is one definition. Yeah. Using the correct grammar. And we've mentioned here coherence. Okay, trying to be correct and precise. I love very much, Marta, what you say there about trying to be correct, because that is actually the name of the game there. And just to point out, we've got another word, accuracy, which has been highlighted in green, okay, for a clue. Okay, so make a note of that. Accuracy illustrates the best structure of speaking. Yeah, that is something that is the golden nugget that we're aiming for, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it's wrong if your learners are speaking incorrectly. Okay, so for me, and thank you very much for producing all of these lovely answers, what my working definition would be, and actually pulling out from what you're saying here, is that accuracy really is being able to produce language, okay, when speaking sounds or language without any mistakes. Now, how we can achieve this in class is going to be developed in the latter part of this webinar, when we will look at some examples. So let's move on, okay, to my next slide. And what do we need to consider? Fluency versus accuracy, okay? And what I mean by this is like this seesaw effect that we have of and you can think about, you know, the teacher and the student and the length of the task that we're giving our student, or the length of the time that the teacher speaks, and then allowing that student or your group of students to speak back. Okay, how much output are we expecting from them? You know, in terms of like, the more they speak, the more mistakes they might make. And then if they're making mistakes, how should we correct mistakes? And I'm very interested in hearing your answers here, okay, about mistakes and what kind of mistakes are good to correct. So please use the chat box. Just take a sip here. This is tea time in the UK at the moment. So tea probably from China or from Malaysia or India. How should we correct mistakes, or how do you correct mistakes? Because I would expect our learners, our students, to be making mistakes. I would say that you would, or we should really correct mistakes very, very rarely during oral fluency work. If we're trying to get our students to produce a long, oh great, this is all coming in now. Thank you so much. Thank you very much, Marta. Okay, about letting the students speak and then afterwards I correct them. Okay, this is great. Okay, stopping them may distract, and focusing too much on accuracy, it will discourage them from trying to express themselves freely. Okay, and this is great, Simonette, what you're saying about balancing the two processes on its positive way of correcting their mistakes. Practice makes perfect. Yeah, we really do expect our learners to make mistakes. In terms of correcting them, I would perhaps do it autonomously. I would make a whole list of mistakes. Well, actually, hopefully it's not that long, but I would collect mistakes, and it depends how I'm observing my students in the classroom. But as you say, I'd let them speak, collect the mistakes, and quite often they're actually the same mistakes that groups of students are making. Then I would actually feed back to the whole class, and then we could discuss them later. Sometimes I would actually feed back the language that I did actually hear, and then get them to discuss and correct it too, rather than me actually correcting. So they're even having to work harder. I'm going to focus on what somebody just said, just a bit higher up, okay, about, that was it, Alexandra, okay, thank you, about students could repeat after teacher the correct pronunciation. And this brings us on to the next point, okay, and that is about pronunciation. What do we mean by it? Because I've decided here to start with pronunciation as a way of developing confident speakers, because it's sometimes overlooked. And I'd say as teachers, we are at a loss on how to develop it. What I mean by pronunciation is, okay, whether what they're saying is understood or can be understood by me. Is it intelligible? Are the individual sounds articulated clearly? Or is the sentence and word stress accurately placed? Or is the intonation appropriate? So we're going to look at 3 examples here of individual sounds, sentence and word stress, and intonation, and how we can develop that in class. So let's move on. Now, for this webinar, I have taken my examples, or I've built on examples from 2 course books, which are aimed at 15, 16-year-olds for IGCSE English, English as a second language, or English as an additional language. These are 2 courses that follow the Cambridge curriculum, and they're aimed at A2 and B1 levels. So it's like post beginners or lower intermediate and intermediate stroke upper intermediate learners. Okay, so what I'd say is make the most of the resources that you've got available to you. You may not have these course books, okay? I'm sure you have got access to some textbooks or things from the internet, but make sure you exploit all the opportunities that are given to you in the course book, as well as following the teacher guidance from the teacher books. So thinking about how we achieve pronunciation in class, I've got one example from the English as an additional language here, and I'm going to highlight, make that bigger for you so that you can see it. So here, we are focusing on word stress. I've started with word stress rather than individual pronunciation or of individual sounds. And the word stress here, okay, are different syllables, okay? And you can see that we have got doctor, photographer, tomato, Australia, Poland, chocolate. You can see that you've got the first syllable highlighted, the second syllable highlighted here, even the third syllable highlighted in lemonade. And we're going to ask our learners as somebody has said about checking and repeating the words that they hear. Don't worry if you're a bit unsure of the pronunciation of the words yourself, because in the book you have got that lovely icon with the headphones, which is indicating that they are on an audio file, so that your students are actually listening to the word. They're then going to be categorizing the words here under different topics, okay? Jobs, hobbies, food and drink, and countries, but they're also focusing on word stress. Now, what I would do is just take that one step further, and I would do something called a word maze. So I'm asking my students to get from doctor to Poland by linking all the words that are stressed on the first syllable. Now, I might decide to do that before they do the work in the student book, because I'm just getting them to focus on the first syllable. So we've got the word doctor right in the chat box. Is it going to be chocolate or tomato or tomato? Okay, for your first syllable, because then we've got to try to get over to the word Poland, and you can go either horizontally or vertically. You can't go diagonally. And great, we've got Marta and Annabelle who have actually typed in chocolate. That's great. Now, after chocolate, is it lemonade or is it, whoops, sorry, is it gardening? Which is the next word? Gardening. Thank you, Jocelyn. Okay, I hope I didn't give the game away there. Okay, now actually we are at a bit of an impasse, because it's very easy to identify the next word, because we can't go diagonally and we can't go backwards, so we only can go across. So the next word is going to be basketball, and then Poland, and then here you got the answers. So that's an activity that you can very easily develop with groups of words. Here is just looking at first syllable stress, but you could do it on second syllable word stress too. There are opportunities throughout the books for you to be able to do that. Now, we looked then at word stress, okay. Then we're going to think about intonation in class, okay, and the use of intonation to signal word stress in sentences. Here I've got two great examples from the course books. And what I would like to just highlight, I'm going to make this larger, okay, for you to look at. That is, listen to the following sentences and decide if the intonation is falling, rising, or rising and then falling. They can listen to the examples here, and then you're going to get them to repeat the sentence repeat the sentences out loud. What would you do to take it one step further? Okay, after repeating those sentences out aloud. I'm going to give you a big clue here. And that is using the mobile phone to record themselves, and then they can send that off to you, or to get other pairs to listen to them, or to get them in a partner to listen to another pair. Okay, so that is one example of achieving intonation. Really, somebody has said already about doing lots and lots of practice of repetition. Here, we've got an example of drilling. And what I'd like to say is, with drilling, try to make it as rhythmical as possible. So here we've got listen and repeat. Look at the photos. Boy, girl, boys, girls. Boy, girls, boys, girls. Get them to tap their fingers or clap their hands or click their fingers or stamp their feet, but lots and lots of repetition. You can also, I did have an example later on about funny rhymes, because they love to have tongue twisters, especially sounds that are difficult in your own language or don't exist in your own language. So on my next slide, I have got here something called, something called back chaining. Okay, somebody is saying here, rapping galore. Okay, I like that. Oh, Simon, it would be great if you could actually give us an example of that. But I'm afraid you can't unmute yourself because of the bandwidth. But if you're interested in rapping with your language, you can listen to some really great examples, I think, from the British Council, and they will give you how to carry out rapping in class. So here, back chaining is a drilling technique, and it's intending to help learners produce difficult sound groups, words or phrases. So the teacher begins either with the last sound or word, and then the learners repeat it. And then gradually they build up the word or phrase by going back to the beginning. So my question here is the first one. What pets do you have? What pets do you have? What pets do you have? Gets a bit boring just repeating it like that. But if you start off with have, and then you go on to you have, do you have, you have, do you have, pets do you have, what pets do you have? And you can actually do that as a chain game around the classroom. It's particularly useful to help learners pronounce weak or elided sounds. And in addition to helping learners say the difficult phrases, it's also fun. Now, Simonette has also produced something here about the Congo speech choir. This sounds fantastic. Okay, and I think you're referring there to when we're having a chain thing going around in the classroom. I'm going to bring up the next slide now, and that is to do with looking at individual sounds. Okay, perhaps this should be at the beginning of my section on pronunciation, but I'm wrapping up this particular section by giving you the idea of a game, okay, which is tic-tac-toe or noughts and crosses. We won't have time to go on to this game today, but you can use different sounds to contrast, say, for example, long and short vowels, it and e, or consonants like p and b, okay, or here, as we've got, consonant clusters. So you would have some consonant clusters written on your right. They could be appearing at the beginning of a word, at the end of a word, or in the middle of a word. And I'd get my students to be in two teams. One team would choose a number to begin with. So say, for example, team A chooses 5. I would get then team B to say a word which has that sound in it, which is a f sound. So hopefully they'd come up with the word fish. And that would mean then that they would choose either a nought or a cross, and they would then be they would then have that point, you could say, and it would be over to the other team to choose another number. So, for example, they're choosing the word, number 3. I'd also be crossing off that, the f there, for number 5. So number 3, the other team would be producing a sound, a word, okay, which would be, okay, it could be jam. And then they would then get the, that would be a cross, okay. And then they would have to ensure that they cross off the j there, okay, on the column on the right. Okay, right. Marta has said repetition and the mistakes list you said would be a great help. Important knowledge, Lumila, thank you for that. Okay, so that is a great idea for you to teach individual sounds in terms of like improving pronunciation so that they can become confident speakers. So now we've looked at pronunciation. I'm going to just mention now communicators, how we're going to develop the confident communicators. In short, we can do this by giving them plenty of opportunities to develop fluency and accuracy by enhancing their vocabulary and grammar skills. How do we do that in class? Okay. So the first thing is, I would like to say is that you're going to upgrade your learner's existing language. Another clue there, existing. Well, so they've got language, some language already at their fingertips, okay? But what we want to do is to get that language from being passive inside their heads to being active, okay? They understand the language. They can read it. They can listen. They understand. They can even use it in writing. So basically, with a closed gap when they're writing, they can do it perfectly. But how about speaking? How can we really develop that actual aspect? And that is really achieved by developing this idea of, or this skill of fluency. So one of the ways I like to start off a speaking lesson, or the speaking part of the lesson, is by using pictures. I'm a big fan of using pictures as conversation starters. Course books are a great source of pictures, okay? And if you don't have course books, there's another idea that I can give to you, and that is using a website called Pobble 365, when there are 365 pictures every day put up on the internet. It's a free website, but it's an idea as a conversation starter for a lesson. Here, we're doing work on, okay, we've got 2 lots of role plays, okay, and that is about planning a shopping trip or about going to a tennis match. So I want to be able to activate their language on shopping and tennis matches. So I'd get them, first of all, to be in pairs, and I would show one of those pictures on the whiteboard, and that would be, say if I'm showing shopping, I'd have partner A with their backs to the board, and partner B would be describing the picture to them. And then by doing so, they're activating some of the language they already know about shopping. We'd then change roles to do it for the tennis match. Okay. And this is a great idea for them then being able to launch into the role play, as you can see here in the book. Developing fluency is actually about getting our students to collaborate with each other. Okay, and I've got another idea here for a role play, or in order to prepare them for this role play here, they need to be able to have the language to be able to tackle the roles of student A and student B. They would have already covered this language in a reading or a listening or a writing activity, but we want them to be able to produce it. Now, one of the ways I would do this is by giving them a game of verbal ping pong. So I would get my learners to produce vocabulary phrases that they would think are important for the roles of student A and student B. And I would get them to come up to the whiteboard in two teams. Team 1 would be representing student A, team B or team 2 would be representing student B, and they would be producing some phrases that are important for the role of student A and then student B, and they would be writing them on the board. And then when they are doing the role plays themselves, okay, they would then elicit the language that they want to use. And so it's a great way of upgrading their language by choosing the best vocabulary. So, and that is by reviewing and recycling the language by going from passive to active language. I love what somebody has just written here about playing cards to be talking cards. Each card has got a different question. The student will answer the question. The card that they will give. This is great. This is a bit like dominoes or the chain game. That's a great idea. So thank you for producing that. It's something that I haven't shown you here, but it's something that I have used, and I like to use that as a revision topic with my learners. So thank you for that. So great that you've put some ideas in the chat box. Somebody I think might have mentioned already this next idea, okay? When we are developing fluency, we should be developing how learners can express their opinions. So I've taken this example in the textbook just one step further. Here, they've got phrases which express disagreement. And this is still quite a passive skill. We want them to use this language actively. So what I would do is, is to actually give them a close activity. And then we have got here, so if I go to the bottom left, no, I'm not going to go to the bottom left, to the bottom right, okay. What would that be? We've got a close activity here, F-E, or the next one up, to be, okay. You can get them to fill that in, and then we would play 4 in a row, or bingo. Okay, so there would actually be, to be honest, okay, for example, thank you. Okay, I'm glad I didn't actually come to saying that. Okay. And then what I would do after that is I would use it as a tick-off list in pairs. I'd get my students to put their initials against the phrases that they use when they are expressing their opinions in terms of the exercise that they're given or the task that they're given in the course book. So these are very simple little activities that you can use with your learners when you want to be developing fluency and perhaps accuracy together. Okay. So another idea about developing fluency and accuracy, would be verbal football, which is a bit like verbal ping pong, but here in the book, we're getting our learners to think of conversations, or here we've got interviews, preparing for interview questions, as a kind of like a game of football. So look at the page, and here we're focusing on those interview techniques. You want to keep the ball rolling or the conversation flowing. And so we're given lots of strategies here on how to develop effective responses. After exploiting the suggestions on this page, I'd ask my students to record themselves, okay? Then I'd perhaps go one step further, okay? And that would be to use Google Voice transcript, okay? And hopefully it comes out accurately, but it's also a way of actually gauging to see whether their pronunciation is on target. I would then share the transcript with another pair and ask them to identify differences and similarities. So that is another idea. Now, I'm coming on to my all-time favorites here. And here we've got an example of developing fluency of speaking just for a minute. So they have been given the topic of computer games. They've been given lots and lots of questions. They've actually been discussing those questions in pairs, and then they have to report to another group. I would say speak for 1 minute about what your partner's told you and report to somebody else in a group of 4 about what they said. Very important to time them for 1 minute, okay? And then that means that they are reducing the language and focusing on that time limit. You can, let me go back a slide, use an interactive Wordle. So I've taken the example from the textbook. Let me just highlight it. Okay, I've got the questions here. Okay, daily life in the future. I've got lots of great questions. So what I decided to do was to go on to an interactive game, which is called Wordle, Word Wall. And, whoops, sorry, I'll go back. And they have got, it's interactive. I won't go offline, I'll show you online because I know I'm running out of time. I get them to spin the wheel, and then it goes round and round and round, and it will stop here. And they would speak just for 1 minute. What are your plans for next year? And I would time them with my interactive timer. That's another clue there, just a minute. Okay. And then after that, I've got 2 more other suggestions, and then it's over to you. Diamond 9, okay, and this is actually getting them to use language really or getting them to collaborate and agree and disagree with each other. They have got here a discussion point, as in exercise 7, and I would elicit from my learners 9 items related to the discussion points, which is here, about how we can save lots of lives by the use of a new vaccine. And I'd write these up on the board, the 9 items, and then I'd get them to rank them in terms of importance and least importance in the form of a diamond 9. You get them to work in groups, and I can guarantee that you're going to get a lot of noise, a lot of debate that is going long. Okay, so Simonette, thank you very much for your beautiful words there. Got one more example to show you, and I'm hoping that you've come up with the game. Oh, sorry, you didn't hear that, with the word. I'm a great one at giving the answer away. Another favorite of mine is Trivial Pursuits. If you don't know what it is, just put in Trivial Pursuits into the internet and it will come up with the idea on how you play it. I use this as a revision topic, I split my group into teams, and I can play the actual board game with lots of questions and moving around, or I read out the questions aloud and I keep a score on the whiteboard or paper, and you can then take turns answering questions. Right, I won't go on to the quiz yet, but if you have found out the quiz, the word, please write that in. But we're going to take some questions now. Okay, so thank you everyone for being brilliant participants, even though it was about developing speaking. I do appreciate your participation here. Okay, so Marta has said, how can we help students with difficulty in memorizing new vocabulary to build speech? I would say, okay, giving them lots of strategies on how they can remember language. It might be through pictures. It might be through what we call mnemonics. So giving them kind of like catchy phrases, like something that's just come to mind, because some students always found, I know this is slightly difficult or a different analogy, but it's the first thing that's come to mind. Because how do you keep remembering the word, how to spell because we would have had a little rhyme, like because how you spell it, big elephants can always understand small elephants. There are lots of little strategies by writing down and repeating. So really, it's actually getting from passive to active language. Thank you, Marta. Okay, pictures, catchy phrases. Okay, great. Okay, do we have any other questions?
So I can't see any more in the chat there. I think we are going to overrun slightly here, so if you wanted to hang on and just listen to a couple of other questions that will come in, then please do. Though we understand if you have to dip out now. We do have a question that's come in that is, should we always speak in English to our students?
Yes. As far as you can, please. Yeah, I understand that it might be quite difficult if English isn't your first language. But I don't think it matters that if you do make mistakes yourself about speaking English. They need to be able to hear English. It might be the only opportunity that they are hearing English when they're in the English classroom. Okay, admittedly, these days they do have access to lots of English input from the internet, but please do, if you can, speak English. I do think there is a place in the classroom to be able to translate something into your first language if it's a lot easier to do so. So as much as possible, please do speak English.